and I see a lot of familiar faces and some new faces. So I do want to quickly just give a quick bio of myself and how I've ended up as part of this conversation, and then introduce my guest, Wendy Cliff, to talk about the local group that she's started and is a part of and organizing in Portland, where she lives. We did have another person scheduled to be on, and I have not heard from him. I'm a little concerned, but I'm sure he'll pop on if he can in the Seattle group. So I'm just watching that. And then in the promo that we did, we basically said that these groups were all in the US. And the truth is we also have a group in the UK. And that just was left out of the publicity material. But so these local groups have an international flair now. So, and once Wendy talks and if Jeff joins, then we'll move into an open discussion and question and answer period. And some people that are already parts of some other local groups are here too. So let me just get right to the introductions, and we will keep this to an hour, but we will invite conversation and want this to be an open dialogue. So I am Hunt Priest, and I'm an Episcopal priest. I did not change my name after my ordination. That came first. And about 2 years ago, I started this organization because I'd been in a research study at Johns Hopkins with religious professionals. That study will be released this summer and will be on the agenda at least two national, international conferences, one at the MAPS conference in June in Denver, and then the World Parliament of Religions in Chicago in August. There'll be a panel around this topic of psychedelics and religion. In July at the Wild Goose Festival in North Carolina, which is primarily a Christian spirituality and social justice festival, we will be there too and have several conversations going on at the Wild Goose Festival. So all that's information's in our newsletter, and hope you'll engage that to the level you are. And if you're going to be in Denver or in Chicago, please let us know and let's connect while we're there. The organization's about 2 years old, and it's a network of educating and resource sharing. And as we move forward, hope that this will expand. Have about 1,000 people on the mailing list now, and just hope this is in a continuing expansion stage, which I feel like it is. There's groups popping up now that I have no connection to, and we find each other. And now, in fact, some of those people are on this call today. So this is emerging like the mycelial network fruits when time is right, and that's what's happening. There's two models I'm using for my work. One is the mycelial network that say that all these connections are already there, and when the time's right, the fruit pops up. And I'm seeing that happen over and over again, and at a faster pace than it was. And then the early church is another model, which were small groups of people gathered locally that were connected to each other, but each of those groups had their own way of being and their own way of understanding the ministry and person of Jesus. And the connections were loose, but they were real. And that's really what I'm hoping for with these local groups. So without further ado, I want to turn the microphone over to my friend Wendy in Portland to let her introduce herself and say a little bit about what they're doing in Portland and how that might apply to other groups we want to form. So,
thanks, Hunt. And I'll say I'm also an Episcopal priest, but I decided I'd let Hunt show the collar today, and you could see that we also don't wear them all the time. So I'm going to be facilitating the group in Oregon with another person. I don't think Aaron's on at the moment, but the two of us will be meeting once a month with people and on Zoom for now. And we're launching it in 2 more weeks. It'll be the first Friday of the month. So we're excited about that. But just a little bit about me. So yeah, my third career is as an Episcopal priest. And I always knew from the beginning that I was not called to traditional parish ministry. So I also have a training in trauma and spiritual care. So I've really looked at in that world. So in the foster care system and with veterans, and also done some hospice work. So I'd heard about psychedelics through the years with all the studies being done around PTSD and end of life. So that was kind of my as a chaplain, because yes, I'm an Episcopal priest, but I identify probably more as an interfaith chaplain. Love interfaith conversation. It makes my heart sing. So part of like how I fell into this was during the pandemic. We'd moved, I lived in California all my life and moved to Oregon in 2018 with my husband, and the pandemic hit, and I just for a lot of reasons just hated Zoom church, just was already on the kind of edges, and decided to do a year-long eco-spirituality program called Seminary of the Wild, which was phenomenal. And one of our guest speakers during that time was Hunt Priest. I'm like, who's this guy? And you know, and I don't think, maybe the title probably said something about psychedelics, but I thought, well, I'll listen to this. And it was great. And one of the things Hunt said during that presentation was, psychedelics are happening, this, you know, it's moving and it's becoming more, you know, whether it's about, you know, the research or the underground, it's just the renaissance is happening, and where's the church going to be? And it just hit me like a lightning bolt, because that's been kind of my path, is kind of the borderlands of Christianity, and where are people, and you know, my kids don't go to church, you know, my friends don't go, you know, I don't blame them, I get what they're, and I'm, as a chaplain, interested in meeting people where they are with their spiritual life. I mean, I am a priest, I love my tradition, and I think there are incredible riches that we can draw upon, but it's not the only way. And I just love story. So anyway, when he said that, I thought, wow, yes, you know, where's the church going to be? And we need to be present to this movement. And then it was like, wow, how did I end up in Oregon, where this is interesting. This is a little Holy Spirit thing that, you know, this is the first state to legalize psilocybin assisted therapy. And I have a background, you know, in trauma and chaplaincy. So that was a little over a year ago, and I'm enrolled to start a program in September to become a licensed facilitator, and I'm just really excited to just be present with people. So I am involved with Transforming Chaplaincies and their whole chaplain network around psychedelics, and so working with them and excited to have that networking and in that area. And then, so in addition to doing the Ligare group, I'm also working with another group of people to do an interfaith integration circle in Portland, or out in Oregon as well. So I think that's enough for, yeah.
Wendy, I do want kind of just in these early organizing stages, and it's kind of been fits and starts, and just we're all trying to find our way in this. What are you finding as you talk to people just locally about what the needs are, I guess?
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. In all my conversations with different people, because they'll hear about it and then, you know, I keep getting connected to more people. What's really moved me is that there's been a couple different responses. One has been people just starting to cry that, oh my gosh, I can actually talk about my psychedelic experiences as it may or may not relate to Christianity, like crying, like just so grateful that there is a space where it's okay. And then the other response is speechlessness, like, really? So there's been that, and yeah. So, and then just in general, just so excited, like it's okay to talk about it. And thank you. And on the flip side, entering into this field, even when I don't identify as a priest, because I know that can be more triggering, when I identify as a chaplain, I've also had just rigidity and happen, like, you know, psychedelic organizations. If I say, you know, how you set up for interacting with chaplains, and they go rigid, and I give my little elevator speech about what a chaplain is today, and still, you know, so there's so much wounding, spiritual trauma and wounding. So it's interesting, you know, those both responses, the people excited and then people like, oh, just stay away. And then, of course, there's the whole role of Christianity with indigenous people and cultural appropriation. So there's a lot of humility we have to exercise in this space too.
That's good. Thank you. Thanks. I didn't have any idea how many people were going to, this was one that we didn't advertise very long. So it's amazing there's 51 people here. And it to me, it's a testament to the interest of the topic. And then I think also interest in the idea of local connecting and local groups. So at the end, in a minute, I'll give you a way to connect to us if you're interested in doing that, to at least get an initial conversation started. As I'm looking at the list of people that are on the call, though, I see a couple people that I've got to know in Des Moines, and that was the first time I went out there with a colleague in the fall, this past fall, and we did a public conversation about psychedelics. We had no idea who was going to come. It was a group of women, spiritual directors, and they invited their network, and some of them came, but then a whole nother crew of much younger people came too. And I think, I don't know how many, maybe 40 people in the room on a getting to be cold, rainy night, Thursday night in Des Moines. And the connections that got made because we were all in the same space. And some people were Christian, some people weren't, some people had a lot of psychedelic experience, some people didn't. And that was a catalyst for actually everything else that's followed since then, because the organizers, the group in Des Moines, and I saw what was possible with just, because that's what happens. You get people in the same space, whether it's on Zoom or preferably in person, and the connections just start happening. So that really is my hope for these local groups. And I can also say maybe not just local geographically, but also interest areas. So if there was a group of African-American Black Christians, or LGBTQ Christians that wanted to, because of specific needs and interests. So that's also kind of affinity groups or groups that are sharing some of the same story, but starting with regional and then moving out from there. Wendy, is there anything else I do want to open this up to a conversation, and maybe invite those that have already been part of a local group to share some of that, not the organizers. We've typically tried to have 2 conveners of each group and then let them call the meetings and have the access to the Zoom information, but that's about the extent of it. And we have some guidelines that we share about what we want to try to avoid talking about. We don't want this to be a marketplace for mushrooms, or trying to respect the legalities of each jurisdiction before we, and the integrity of what we're doing too, so that we're not somehow in trouble legally either. We want to keep the conversations around issues of legality for now. So, but if there's anyone in any of the local groups that are on here that I know they are, please raise your hand or just open your mic. And my typical tech support wasn't available today, so I'm kind of doing that myself. But if you want to raise your hand or just open up your mic, any of the local groups or people that have been talking about this for a little bit longer, feel free to jump in. Or ask a question of Wendy or me. Oh, yeah, Dave. Dave, I can't.
My bad. I'm sorry. I had a hardware mute.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have I was in the same study that Hunt was in. When I came back to Birmingham, Alabama, there just weren't a whole lot of people to talk to about that. So I started a psychedelic and entheogen discussion group, which really has grown. We have about 500 people who are members on the meetup group. Now, we don't have 500 people show up at meetings, but we do meet regularly, both to do harm reduction and to do peer support, and also to do integration. It's been interesting for me as a pastor. It has been interesting. I kind of carry that identity with me when I go in there, but I make it really clear this is all modalities, all different worldviews, and it has been fascinating. I mean, I've had people talk to me afterwards about integrating this into their faith tradition. who feel comfortable talking to me about their Christian faith. But it has been fascinating. We have some of those same kind of guidelines. We don't exchange money or substances. Confidentiality, respecting different modalities and different worldviews. But that has been really, it's been helpful for me. First of all, I needed people to talk to, so I just gathered a group, and that was wonderful. But I would love to see that kind of stuff happen with more of a specifically faith-based flavor, because I think there's a lot of folks who need that kind of support as well. So that's it.
That's good. Thanks, Dave. Wendy, as Dave was talking, I was thinking about you're kind of doing it in a different way in Portland, trying to engage the Portland Psychedelic Society, which is already existing, and
it's when I was introduced to the Portland Psychedelic Society, which uses Meetup also, I was just astounded at the number of groups they have going, whether it was for veterans or survivors of domestic violence, or a women's circle, a men's circle. And it reminded me of church groups too, in that way. And so that is where the platform we're hoping to put the interfaith integration circle that we've developed. We've come up with a whole, and beta tested it and everything. So I think that'll be and one of the people who helped that we originally talked about this idea, actually a lawyer, was saying, let's find a place that's religion positive, whatever, however you define that. There are all these other integration circles, but there aren't spaces for people who may be exploring or firmly rooted in a tradition. So I'm excited to have both that interfaith conversation as well as one that's more, loosely related to, however we define Christianity. So, yeah.
I think I lived in Seattle for 8 years, and I remember there would be every religious and spiritual tradition mentioned and honored, and except mine, which was a testament, I think, to. I think a lot of that's our fault. So I blame a lot of that on how the church has functioned in the world in the last 25 years or something. But I suspect there was an affinity group in the Portland Psychedelic Society for every category and identification except Christian. So yeah, that's just the state of where we are. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, my friend Julie.
Hey, Hunt, it's so nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
You gave us a shout out in Des Moines. And so there were 5 of us in our core group, and we have continued to support and guide each other on journeys, and the word gets out. And so one thing that we're doing with people who we fairly vet and trust is we've started a lot of people microdosing, and we're using the same kind of ritual form. We do a lot of communicating in between, and it's mostly, we're working in the realm of spirituality, and there's just a real hunger for it. And so we feel like we're really moving along and growing. And we're missing you and Jimmy, and hoping you come
Oh, we'll definitely be back. That was a watershed. That was a watershed moment. It honestly really was. It was a watershed experience to see what can happen with locally, and so it continues.
Yeah, and we really feel like between the 5 core of us, we feel like we've just made such a strong web, and now just bringing more and more people in, and it's all about spirituality. So, and if Deb has something to say,
yeah, that'd be good. Deb.
Welcome hearing from her.
It's interesting who shows up and asks questions, and it's I would say the web is like the mycelium that you talked about, where someone just pops up or someone remembers. We held an event in November, even though they didn't come to the event. But in terms of what you said, Julie, about vetting, typically we want people to have a spiritual practice in order for us to feel safe working with them. So we kind of use that as a determination of whether someone's grounded, and we'll bring the right kind of intention to the practice and to see it as a practice.
How are you? This is either Deb or Julie. How do you do you encourage people to? Are there certain tools or practices that seem to be more resonant with people? I'm thinking about the Enneagram is one thing, because I know Julie works with that, but I'm wondering if there's some that feel easy, like a easier access point for people that maybe don't have a practice, or any things that you recommend right off the bat for people if they don't have one, or do you just not talk to them if they don't have a practice already?
You know, I don't think anybody has gotten a hold of us who doesn't have a practice. Des Moines has got a really vibrant spiritual community, and that's where everybody is coming out of that community. And some people that we've worked with, when they first heard about it in November, they were like, nah, it's not for me, never going to think about that again. And then, give us a call and say, I'm in, I want this experience.
Yeah, right. Wow.
So yeah, it's just so fun, because we really do feel like we've got this big connection now with this group of people now in Des Moines that we've shared these experiences with. And they're all so fulfilling. So I know the last forum we had was on bad trips, but we're not hearing a lot of that.
I want to say too, our experience with you in November here of holding space together in ritual has carried over, like there's 3 of us who are gonna start someone tomorrow. And along with that, we kind of set an altar. We tell them we may be anointing you, we may be laying hands on you, we may be singing with you, we don't know. We just kind of keep it open, and then let's, in that trusted environment, let people express what they need to.
Yeah, beautiful.
So it's a carryover, though, from our experience with you.
Oh, good. Yeah. I just was on a call yesterday with a training program, one of the bigger training programs, talking about Christianity and how Christianity, either for therapists to understand that people are bringing this, whether that's part of your practice as a therapist or not, people are bringing this. And here's healthy ways to engage Christianity. And here's this depth of resources in the Christian tradition, both liturgy and story and spiritual practices that really can, for people that are with a Christian background or interest or connection, can really resonate with and connect to and expand their experience, and to be scaffolding in a container, which I think that's one of the things the religious traditions can bring to this whole movement. And there's a lot the psychedelic movement is going to bring to the religions, I think, which is an actual experience of God. Imagine that, but happening. But there's a real synergy, and there was a real openness to this group that we weren't sure if there would be, because it's mostly therapists, and there's a kind of maybe not antagonism necessarily to religion, but a lack of engagement. So that was good. And to remember that this is happening in all over the country. These are not coastal events. The Des Moines group, the conversation the big conversation in Birmingham, where I am in Savannah, some of the people that I've been talking to are on this call. So this is not just Berkeley and Boston and Austin. It's really all over the country. It's not just the West Coast and East Coast. So important. Thank you all. Anything else from Des Moines that you all want to share? Because you all been at this a while now.
Well, and I just want to say the microdosing thing was something we didn't really expect, but that's where we do rituals, starting people out with that too. But just people who are in the spiritual community and struggling with like a husband with Alzheimer's or something, and just helping them get to depths of being. And then And then just keeping that connection going, like how you doing, what do you need? And so I, like I said, and Deb will, I'm sure, agree, and Joan as well, that just I don't know, we're really pleased with the way this is forming.
It's amazing. Me too.
Growing. It is amazing.
Yeah, I'll have a separate call with you all. I haven't talked to you. It's been overdue, and I'll give we need to have a separate call to catch up on the details. But thank you all. Adam, unmute. Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, Hunt, based on what you were just mentioning about kind of interacting with one of the training programs out there, and also a follow-up call to something Wendy was talking about being in the process of certification for psilocybin therapy in Oregon. Wendy, I was curious, and I think we've crossed paths on the Transforming Chaplaincy calls. But I was curious what the certification looks like in Oregon, and particularly if you're kind of going that route as a chaplain versus a therapist. You know, this question is sort of based on the assumption that other states, the less enlightened states, as we sort of catch up to what's happening in Oregon and Colorado, will probably, you know, in many ways follow suit for the different types of procedures and structures being put in place. Yeah, so I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that certification.
Sure, yeah. So Oregon, just briefly, in case people don't know, our model is that it's highly regulated, as one would guess. It's not a dispensary model. So people must take the medicine in a service center that has been licensed and by the state, and they must have 2 facilitators present for the duration who have been licensed by the state. The psilocybin has been grown in a place licensed by the state and then tested in another place licensed by the state. And then the state also regulates which training programs meet their requirements. So the list of training programs has been growing and growing and growing that are meet the requirements that Oregon has, because the facilitator, once they go through the program, then has to take a test and then pay a fee. It's expensive. So as I discerned this call to actually be present, I mean, because I knew as a priest or as a chaplain, I could be, you know, do integration and prep if I, you know, with some training, but, you know, did I want to, what was my need to be present in the room when they took the medicine? And for me, it had to do with being a chaplain and knowing that part of my call is to be present at time of death and trauma, you know, all the things that people are usually afraid of being a part of. And I thought, okay, you know, doing psilocybin can be scary for people, and to have somebody who's comfortable and knows how to have presence during that. So anyway, so as I started looking at programs, there's, I mean, many of the programs in California especially, and have long history of doing training for psychedelic facilitators, obviously in an underground context. But I have not found any yet in Oregon that are based in Oregon that really understand the role of a chaplain. Those are the places at Horizons last year where I went up to their tables and they went rigid when I mentioned being a chaplain. And so I've had to, the program I'm in, was accepted into is the UC Berkeley one, the Berkeley Center for the Science of Psychedelics. And they very much understand the role of chaplains. So that was important to me. I just decided at my phase in life, I don't want to be the trailblazer with an organization to try to help them understand the sort of training we already have that make us so ready to be in this space. So I think so, and Berkeley's program, and now a few of the other California programs do meet Oregon's requirements. So that was important to me.
Adam, where are you? I can't remember.
I'm in Boston.
Oh, Boston.
And would be excited to talk to other Bostonians.
Okay, good. I just put our email address into the chat. So if you're I mean, feel free to email about anything, but especially around this topic of starting a local group, we have just some guidelines and resources and support that we can offer. And each group of conveners, there's 2 conveners for each group, and we meet with the conveners. So that's where the cross-pollination happens, is in those meetings. Dave?
Yeah, I just wanted to lift up, if for those who are interested in various trainings and certifications, something I ran into yesterday was I got accepted to I am about to acquire my ALC for mental health counseling, and I had applied and been accepted to the California Institute of Integral Studies. And then I got my invitation rescinded because Alabama has a pay-to-play thing for distance education. And I don't know how they can do this. I'm trying to find out if they can actually restrict what I'm considering chaplain education or clergy education with these sort of interstate anti-competitive online education laws. But a lot of the trainings and things are offered online, and so you might have to check with your state to see what kind of obstacles. This is just one of those crappy obstacles that got in my way. So there's all this stuff, bureaucratic stuff, that is a reason that people do it underground, because it's a lot easier than this baloney. Anyway, I just wanted to lift that up. Those of you who are looking for certification may want to see what state problems you might run into.
CIIS is great. And I think like Chacruna is another one that really understands the role of chaplains. And I think there might be one more too at this point.
Yeah.
And spiritual directors, just people in spiritual care providers, I should say.
Yeah. And on these calls, I do, most people are familiar with chaplains and most people are familiar with clergy, but spiritual direction is another avenue. And there's several spiritual directors on this call. And I always say, in the non-therapeutic realm of this, I think spiritual directors are the clinicians of the spiritual directors and chaplains, and some clergy, but typically our training as parish clergy does not include enough of the broader spiritual tradition to, I mean, some of us are trained for that, or just naturally oriented that way, but I think spiritual directors and chaplains are key. And I'm keeping track of the chat, and there was Liz, I'll get to you in just a second, a question from Tim Black about, he's someone that works in the hierarchical church, which Wendy and I do, Episcopal Church, and asking about efforts to educate the leadership. And just quickly to kind of talk about the timeline, the study I was in at Hopkins and NYU was finished about 2.5 years ago. The results have just been slow to come. They're coming out this summer. And that's kind of in some ways, that's the trigger for a much bigger educational. I've tried, in 2016, I would try to have conversations about this with people, clergy and bishops, and just get a blank look. Not necessarily a judgment, just like, what, really, Ellen? You're talking about mushrooms? And then Pauline's book came out, and then the research just started flooding out, and then it just became a totally different conversation. But it's still not so much in the religious realm, it's more in the clinical therapeutic realm. The religious professional study that Dave and a few of us that are on this call were in, Jamie Clark Souls, that we're in, once that's released, there'll be a moment of a big Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist conversation. And that's what we're trying to get ready for, to be prepared for. So talking to denominational leadership will be ahead of that a little bit, because as those of us in these hierarchical traditions know, bishops don't like to be surprised. And the Methodist Church and the Episcopal Church and the Lutheran Church and the Baptist world have people in this study. So we're going to try to give a little heads up to them so that they're not surprised. But so, and Tim, I think Atlanta's going to be, there's several Atlanta people on the call, and that's probably the next area that we want to try to get a local group started in Houston, but we'll do it based on interest. So that's why I put the email address in. So please just let us know, and we'll begin to facilitate that this summer. Thanks. Liz?
Hi, everybody. I'm Elizabeth. I'm in Oakland, California, and I invite anybody who's here to be in touch. I'm practicing what I call community chaplaincy. I'm an interfaith chaplain ordained in 2021, and really very interested in understanding psychedelics as a way of in a sense, tipping people into deeper spiritual and healing conversations and presence with themselves and their families. I currently chaplain my father as he approaches his 100th birthday, and I'm really looking at anticipatory grief as people approach end of life. I mean, we have a learning lab here in Oakland. I invite anybody to come here to what I call the domestic monastery, Casa del Milagros. And my father's not doing mushrooms, but I am. And I think that caregiver support is really important. As an ordained interfaith chaplain with a Christian background and a Christian practice, as well as practices in other traditions, I actually see that the issues around understanding chaplaincy are a barrier. I constantly get asked, I'll introduce myself as an interfaith chaplain, and immediately the question will be, what denomination? And I'm like, okay, here we go. So I actually think that the opportunity for spiritual direction is really great. If you look at the mission of spiritual direction, it takes the presencing that happens in chaplaincy and it bolts on co-creation and collaboration with Source or the Most High, or whatever you want to call your Barca lounger in the sky, the great comfort. So I would just say that I think there's something around spiritual direction that is really the opportunity, the green field that we can roam out into more freely, because sometimes the conversation gets completely shut down. I understand, Wendy, your experience with the Horizons people. I've had that too. This, like, first off, it's fear that it's going to get co-opted, because I think sadly Christians have a co-opting history, and that's something I deal with all the time. So anyway, but mostly a welcome to anybody in the Oakland or Northern California space. Thank you. Hunt, you may be muted.
Sorry. Did you want to put your email address in as a way for people to connect? And there's I know
Yeah, I'll
there's-
handle that. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks. Thank you.
And thanks to those reaching out already.
Oh, good. Yeah, shocking. There's a lot of interest in the Bay Area. Yeah, that was really the first group that I early on went out there and met with a few people. Some of them are on the call now too. So a couple of years ago. Good. Micah.
Yeah, it's the time people in Oakland to talk. I'm really looking forward to connecting with Elizabeth and Barry and other folks in the Bay Area. And in addition, I just want to share that I have a particular interest in folks who are specifically interested in like Trinitarian Orthodox Christian faith. I think I'm picking up that I might be a little bit on the outskirts of the Ligare, and that I'm more evangelical, more Orthodox, more religiously conservative. The interfaith conversation is interesting to me. The specific, how do we be Trinitarian Orthodox Christians, not diverging at all from 1,000 years of tradition with psychedelics, is very interesting to me. So interested to hear specifically if anyone wants to hit me up with, if that's an interest of yours. Love to talk with you about that.
Good. Yeah. Yeah. Wendy, do you want to?
I was just going to say, I was late to the party of the Christian Psychedelic podcast, so I'm catching up with them. But I listened to one yesterday with a woman who's Orthodox Christian too. It was really interesting. And another one I listened to yesterday, the guy said that Jesus is an integration coach. And I just thought, wow, because if you look at Christianity from a mystical tradition, like, so he's the integration coach. Like, how do you integrate the Christian tradition? And Jesus is the integration. I loved that phrase. I hadn't heard it before. So I just wanted to name the Christian aspect that warms my heart too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even though like all of us, I think in Christian leadership, we do want to be in really deep conversation with other traditions. And I really do try to bring the conversation eventually back to very Orthodox Christianity, not narrow and not closed and not, I mean, open to the world and open to other people, but also there's a very, very limited space to have a Christian conversation around psychedelics. And Christianity is complicated and there's multiple strands and many Christianities, but yeah, maintaining, putting Jesus at the center and maintaining a Trinitarian theology is very important. So yeah, and there are more and more people coming from evangelical traditions that are finding me or finding the conversation and putting their if they deconstructed it, then putting it back together in a very Orthodox way. There's a lot about evangelicalism that's not Orthodox. So just because it's conservative doesn't mean it's Orthodox. So
and I'll just add to that too, that where I think Ligare and, we want the tent to be wide around Christianity. And I mean, I feel like part of my moving to Oregon, and one of the things I missed the most was that there was no interfaith council, interfaith group. So I'm curious to see if this psychedelic integration circle, the interfaith one, can build community. And that might be the way people come together. Whereas California, they already had these interfaith councils. But I wonder in the same way, because I feel like interfaith dialogue is the hope for the world too. But I wonder about these Christian integration circles, that if they are broad enough, if we can, mend all the schisms in the Christian tradition. I mean, if you look at the history, I mean, it's insane the number of traditions that came from this one source. So I would love the idea that we can hold space in the Christian community for evangelicals and Unitarian, whatever. So I thank you for bringing up this topic. To me, there's hope for healing of whatever fractures have happened.
definitely. Yeah. So for those of you that are kind of interested in local things, there's definitely some conversation going on in the chat right now with different locations and different ideas. Look, as I'm trying to keep track of it, Bonnie asked about the podcast. It's a Psychedelic Christian podcast. Really wonderful guy in Texarkana that does that, and doing that. He's one of the places where this sprung up without any connection to me, and then we got connected, and I was on there. So he's right there in Texarkana. So I don't know if Clint's on here or not, but all right, Josh.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm going to keep the Oakland stream running here. I haven't met any of you other Oakland folks yet, but these little mycelial networks are forming right before our eyes. I've been active out here for a number of years and have hosted Hunt out here for a visit. And I wanted to just mention a couple of things. I've been gathering some local clergy together, and in one particular meeting, we were working with cannabis as a psychedelic based off of medicinal mindfulness in Boulder, Colorado, with Daniel McQueen and his work. And almost half the states have legal medicinal or recreational cannabis, and don't underestimate that medicine as something that can be very powerful and healing. And it can be a little baby step towards the psychedelic world for people who might not be quite ready for something like mushrooms. It's done in a ceremonial way and can be quite powerful. And in one particular gathering of these clergy, we had a very powerful experience. It's done with an eye mask and evocative music. And we met on a Friday morning, and then we had lunch together. And one of the pastors said, we curate worship experiences and we care for our congregation. But here today, this morning, we had an encounter with the divine, and we're seeking to harmonize our life with that experience. And we're doing it here in community over a meal. This feels like church. And so it was a very powerful moment of just recognizing just how powerful these medicines are, just for bringing people together. 4 pastors who often don't get the church feel and experience of that community in their own congregations, and for meeting and connecting and offering each other the support that that a lot of times only clergy know that they need. And so that's just a model of something that we're doing that was really wonderful. I'll put the information for that resource on using cannabis in the chat, but looking forward to grabbing coffee with you other Oaklanders, and let's connect and talk a little bit about how we can continue to grow these networks.
That's so, yeah, thank you, Josh. Thank you so much. Yeah, I have a couple other topics, but I want to make sure that if there's any other questions to please raise your hand, and either to share some insight or to ask a question of any of us that have already spoken. Just going to put a couple people on the spot to join a little bit on the spot. I won't. Annette, I'm gonna, if you're up for it, you joined a little bit late, and as you joined, I was saying that in the promotional material, we just in error just mentioned this is domestic work, and as someone that's gathering a group in the UK, I'm wondering if you could share some insight about how that's going. Or
thanks, Hunt. I'm not bothered of being put on the spot, but I am on a train, so
okay.
I'm sitting among other people. So I think I need.
Yeah,
I'll
okay,
do it
that's
some
fine.
other time.
That's
Maybe not today. Anyway, lovely to see everybody. Nice to be part of this, even if I'll probably have to leave early as well. But when I arrive at Waterloo.
That's a first. That's a first for our for these Ligare forums. That's excellent.
You've been on this train.
I have been on that train. I've been on that train. Yeah. So thanks, Annette. One of the after effects of being first in Oakland 2 summers ago, and then in Des Moines, was we went to London and did a very public event there at a parish church, and started a conversation. It was really wonderful. It was a combination of therapists and spiritual directors and lay people and clergy, and that was part of that. And that started a group in the UK. So all over, she's in the north and some people in London, and they're meeting once a month. We're mostly doing these once a month on Zoom, and then letting whatever happens in person happen organically, because that's, and I always say I don't own this or want to own this. I just want to facilitate it. So, and there's multiple ways to engage it. So yeah, I'm wondering if there's any other questions or one desires to connect. I can pass through the chat real quick here, but there's some contact information for Clint, East Tennessee, Cami. So we're doing them regionally. I mean, the Washington State group is Seattle and the eastern part of the state and out on the islands, and the Oregon group is Portland and South. So there's a group in Boulder and Denver as well that's just now forming. I saw a question about that. So we'll publicize the contact information of these groups as they form. We just haven't done that yet, but we'll do that as we move along. This is all emerging and following a timeline of the study that I was in, and just following the actual resources we have, which are pretty limited right now for people. But we have 2 people that are coordinating these groups. So we have some more capacity to expand that now. So again, any other questions or chats or comments? I will make a copy of the chat so that I can. Here's another friend that we did a local group with, my friend Ron.
Yeah, I just was kind of excited when I heard Julie talking about the Des Moines group. And there's an article about the Church of the Awakening, which was founded back in the 60s in Socorro, New Mexico, by a physician and the 2 physicians, really, a couple, John Aiken and his wife. And he was a Presbyterian elder. And it was unfortunately at a time when the law was in a very reactionary phase. But there's a wonderful article that he wrote called The Church of the Awakening in a book edited by Aronson and Osmond called Psychedelics. And you can get it for a relatively inexpensive price. But I just think that for people who are interested in starting a psychedelic church that is not fundamentalist, I think that it is the best prototype. And it's unfortunate that it did not receive constitutional protection. I think that an enlightened review under evolving standards would certainly recognize it as an appropriate model. And I would also want to put in a plug for the Denver Natural Medicines legislation as being very amenable and hospitable to the options for a ceremonial context, which I don't really think Oregon offers. So I think for people going forward, if you're going to work as a church underground, do not ask the Drug Enforcement Administration for permission. It's like calling your mother from college and saying, "Hey, Mom, I want to take some acid tonight. Is that cool with you?" But it's what I would. People have analogized it to a fatal attraction, where they will not say it's okay. They don't trust anybody, and the courts are more open to it. And I just say, don't wave a red flag in front of a bull. Practice harm reduction. Be very, very, very careful about it. And I know that that's not the Ligare model, but I did hear them talking about offering microdoses. That is offering a controlled substance under Schedule 1. That's very dangerous. It's not legal unless you feel confident that you are practicing a bona fide religious ceremonial practice. And then it would be up to the government to say that you're not. So this is a very gray area, and nature favors the bold. Brazil started the whole Santo Daime tradition and Unio de Vegetal, which are now legal. They were all underground churches at the beginning. The Christian church was underground too. So there's a lot to be gained, but there's also a lot to be lost. So be very careful and do your research.
There are law firms that are, focusing on this issue too. So there is legal advice out there. I don't have a list of them. Maybe you do, Hunt, but you're muted.
Sorry, I do have a list, so I can get that. I'm noticing people are joining, which makes me think that maybe the time zone wasn't clear. So if you're just joining us from somewhere besides the East Coast, which I think a lot of these people are, it was noon Eastern. So sorry about that. This is recorded, so we'll send it out. First I know it's coming in from Denver. We'll send the recording out as soon as it's edited down a little bit. For those who are just joining, we've started at noon Eastern. Let me, my friend Doug Lynham.
Hi, just quick, thanks, Hunt. Just a quick plug. We've started a church here in Santa Fe, New Mexico. It's based on the teachings of Father Richard Rohr. If anyone's curious, I've put my email in the chat box. Feel free to reach out.
Okay, good. And Doug, you also, I noticed earlier in the chat, you mentioned the Enneagram, which is also, Julie works with the Enneagram too. And I know that's, did you want to say a little bit about that and how that might be helpful?
Oh, sure. I mean, the Enneagram, for those who aren't familiar with it, it's a personality assessment tool, but it's much more than that. And it was designed by for those of you who are familiar with it, you might not know that it was designed by psychonauts. Claudio Naranjo and Oscar Chazo, who were some of the founders, were doing psychedelic assisted therapy down in South America in a clinic for years and came up with it. And we're also, to give you a little more credence to it, there's a book called The Healing Journey by Claudio Naranjo that was the inspiration for a young Rick Doblin to found MAPS. So there's a full circle here that I think is worth pointing out. But essentially what the Enneagram does, and it's very robust and complicated system with a fractal structure that's sort of infinite, but essentially it can give you an understanding of how your ego is structured. What's the basic archetypes? There's only so many ways you can design an ego container and have it function effectively. Like there's only so many ways you can design a car, but there's styles of cars, right, and vehicles. And so it tells you kind of the style of the vehicle that your ego is driving around in and the lens through which you perceive all of reality. And as someone who does, I'm not trying to plug anything here, but with a lot of experience guiding others, I've seen it robustly show up over and over again that where people struggle on a psychedelic experience, or when they have a very positive love and light, the flavor of those positive or negative experiences correlate to people Enneagram types, because the Enneagram will tell you what your greatest fear is, and it will tell you what your greatest hope is. And so those are the two things you tend to confront on psychedelics in one way or another. So you can predict what someone's likely to experience, the difficulties, have some intuition at least about where difficulties will arise on a psychedelic experience. And then kind of what you're hoping for will be the positive, go through the shadow, confront your darkness, and then you pop out the other side, and then you get kind of its antithesis. And so that's why, and for many, many reasons, why the Enneagram is a helpful tool for psychonauts.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Wendy?
I'll just add, when we're thinking about these models, I absolutely agree about the Enneagram. And I think there's a lot of intersection with internal family systems, which is a therapeutic model, and that's been used by MAPS and different of these studies too. So I think the two of them, and I do know one person who's an IFS coach and knows the Enneagram, and she's a theologian, and she wrote a whole book on trauma-informed theology through a process theology model. So I'd love to see more of how Enneagram and IFS and psychedelics interact.
Sorry, I just jump back and say, I agree with that. And I'm doing that as well. Love it. And they do pair well together. I just didn't want to go off on two things at once.
Yeah, sorry.
And then throw in some Jungian work, some Jungian insight too, I think. There's a book called The Book of Symbols that I've used in my own, trying to figure out what in the world something meant in my own experiences. That's been helpful too. So, yeah. Well, I want to encourage everyone, a bunch of local geographical mentions are made in the chat from Long Island and from Albuquerque and or New Mexico and California and Birmingham and Des Moines. So, and I'll save that. If there's any questions for me specifically, I'll come back and look and respond to those. I do want to honor the time. I just want to see if there's any other final comments, either from anyone in the group that might have a final question or any last minute insight. Please raise your hand and we'll certainly want to invite you. There's some serious energy. I'm sorry I didn't have somebody here to help with the tech. I thought it'd be a small group, honestly. So I didn't realize there'd be this much. That's very encouraging, everything we're doing. And also I saw a Washington, D.C. locate person too, so Atlanta. So look through that real quick before you get off and see if there's any connection there. And that info@ligare.org will be a place for us to channel any interest that you might have either in starting something or finding another group. And as this emerges, we'll continue to put it in our newsletter. So that'd be the place to look for any updates on this. So I will be at and several of us on this call will be in Denver for the MAPS conference. And then the Wild Goose Festival, which is a Christian festival in North Carolina, mid-July. I'll be there. We're one of the sponsors. There'll be several conversations about psychedelics and Christianity. And then the World Parliament of Religions, which Jamie Clark Souls mentioned in the chat, is in August. There'll be a panel with her, Richard Rohr, Roland Griffiths from Hopkins, and Mike Young, who was in the original study, the original Good Friday experiment in 1962. And there's a website, just Google Parliament of World Religions. And on the Wednesday of that week is the panel that Jamie's on, and Father Rohr and Roland and Mike. So, and I hope I'm sure the stuff will be recorded and that'll be available if you can't get to Chicago in August, then I think there'll be ways to access that too. But that's an important moment to have those four people talking about this topic at the World Parliament of Religions. So, oh, sure. Trip.
Hey, my name is Trip Gebhardt. I literally jumped on real late. Love the energy, love the space. My wife and I just put out a podcast. I'm an Ignatian spiritual man. My wife's more of the yogi side, but we've been coaching families in addiction for the last like 20 years. And it's been our passion, and we are now healing people with psilocybin and really from an Angola standpoint, from addiction, it's just been absolutely incredible, the work that has been done. And I want to thank you all on your support in that, because it's a team deal here. So just to introduce myself, I'll see whoever's going to be in Denver for MAPS. I look forward to it. And I posted our podcast just on the chat if you guys want to check it out.
And Trip, are you okay saying where you are geographically? Or
Denver. I'm in Denver.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Good, good.
So.
I emailed you this morning. So.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, I don't know if I got your email. I got the this email.
No, I emailed you like in the last
Okay.
hour, so to catch up with you. So.
Okay, good.
I think, see, there we go. The Ignatian practices. That's here. There's another whole resource in the Christian tradition that most people aren't aware of, which could be a major.
Well, yeah, and I'll tell you, like, we have been people that have completely shut themselves off from faith of all kinds, and like lovingly, like Boulder kind of crystal hippie people, and I have them working the spiritual exercises, and they love it. So it's just amazing, because it's so practical. They can actually get their arms around it and stay connected and empowered and embodied with Christ as they go forth. So,
right. There's some good Orthodox Christianity right there. That's good. Thank you. Yeah. All right. Well, please just watch our, anybody else? Just watch our emails. And this is talking about co-creating. That's what this is. That's what this call has been. That's what the work that Wendy and Annette and the others that are convening these groups are doing. And let's just keep at it. And these conferences will be big moments, and then we're going to be responsive as we can to what the needs are. That's what the needs are, is what's driving my work right now. I've done a lot of work in the last 2 years finding the others, and now I want the others to find the others, and I'll connect that as best I can. So it's an amazing group of people on here.